Welcome, everybody, to our webinar series. This is webinar number 66 that we've done since we started these March 2020. And we have a special guest today. The uh, series of guests that we've been doing lately has been authors of data books and race engineers and bringing some other folks in where we don't necessarily talk fully about the technical aspects of the AIM software and which buttons to push and how to interpret and analyze the data, but rather some folks coming in and giving us a bigger picture of data acquisition and data analysis and how we use it. And today we're privileged to have Buddy Fay here, who is the author of Data Power, the book, using Racecar Data Acquisition. I think 1993 is when it came out. And let's slide to the next slide. Just a little bit about Buddy, and then we'll chat with him. But this is a book that I bought very early when I started getting into data analysis as a family, as a dad of a kid that was racing, and then into doing it professionally, and now here with AIM. But it was the first book I bought, and I've got a few stories about that we'll talk about, but a little bit about Buddy, and then we'll have him, give us a little bit of information about himself as well. But Buddy is number one, is a race engineer, and of course this is a tool that he uses, and he's been doing this for a long time. 1976 is when it looks like he got started in many different forms of motorsports. Years of developing and supporting computer systems and mechanical and structural design. So engineer background, certainly. I continue to hear from other folks that have used his skills and his consulting for their race teams over the years. We'll chat about that a little bit. And of course, the way that most of us know of Buddy is from the Data Power book. So, as far as I know, the first book on racing data acquisition, and of course, a true pioneer in the field. Welcome, Buddy. Thank you for coming here. We certainly appreciate it.
Thanks, Roger. Glad to be here.
I met Buddy, I think, on the phone. I don't think we've ever met in person that I can recall, but we started to chat on the phone. You had been working in the industry for a long time, and then ended up working with a team, I think in Trans Am. I don't remember exactly which, but you started to use some AIM hardware, and you had all the skills needed to do it, but you just needed a couple little tips on which buttons to push to make it happen. So we chatted back and forth on email a few times, and got you up to speed. You can always tell guys like you that I give you 2 or 3 ways of doing things, and once you understand how the software is working, boy, you were off and running. So that was the first time we met. Give us a little bit more of a background on yourself. What got you here?
I got started racing when I was literally in high school, not as a driver, but as a spectator. I grew up in Southeast Arkansas, and we were close to one of the, I don't know, I guess at that point it was 10 or 12 tracks where they ran SCCA Club Racing Nationals. It was a national points championship that time. They didn't have the runoffs. So people came from all over the country with every manner of exotic car. And my friends and I were all car nuts, and we were hooked. So it led shortly after that to me buying myself a race car and running it myself for about 15 years. And when I got caught up in a corporate shuffle where my boss made too many people mad, they fired him and they fired me with him. And so I got booted into racing. To be honest, at that point, I'd been thinking about going into racing for a couple, 3 years. So that's how I got into professional racing in general. Specifically, how I got started on data systems was that my professional career was as supporting engineers using computers in a big international corporation. So I kind of had all the pieces there. I was working on the car, I was driving it, I was an engineer, I knew computers, and at that point, this is 1991, data acquisition was still a pretty fresh thing in the racing world. And I said, hey, let's give that a try. Maybe that's a foot in the door. And lo and behold, it turned out to be. And God bless him, my old friend Will Moody, who was the race engineer on the Chevrolet factory Trans Am team, which is the car that's on the cover of the book, Jack Baldwin's car. gave me a shot, and the rest, as they say, is history.
Actually, that was one of the questions I had, and Joe brought it up in the chat box briefly. He says, "I think Jack Baldwin drove that Camaro." How did you end up selecting that picture?
Well, they were happy to let me use it, and
Of
away we
course they
went.
were. Of course they were. I got lucky to. I was working, giving a talk on data at a seminar, and Jack Baldwin was the lunchtime speaker, and what an interesting and fun to talk to man he was as well. So that was I didn't get much time to chat with him, but enjoyed that, and he was so successful. And that car is iconic, obviously in that world, right? The old Hot Wheels Camaro. So pretty cool. The a little bit more about you. What form of motorsports did you spend a lot of time on early on? It's been road racing, I think, for the most part, right? That you've
I've been
done.
almost exclusively road racing.
Okay.
I was through the Trans Am team. I was fortunate to get associated with General Motors, and they hooked me up with Joe Gibbs Racing in their formative years. I was, I think, employee number 19 for them. So I did 4 years in NASCAR. It was a lot of fun, and Joe and his team were great guys to work with, and we had, as you might imagine, we had a budget with resources to play with all kinds of cool things. But ultimately, I wasn't a stock car racer at heart, and that wasn't where I was going to be for the rest of my career. Um, so somewhere around along about that time, an Atlantic thing morphed into a couple of years of IRL, which was kind of interesting. And then it was come back home to sports car racing and work in endurance racing, which really has been my bread and butter, along with sprint racing and road racing.
Certainly.
So prototypes, GT cars, they've been the big bulk of it, but there's been some open wheel stuff. And then most recently, in a complete shift for the last 3 years, I've been the tech director for SCCA Pro Racing's FR, formerly known as F3, and F4 series, which are spec series for training young drivers who have aspirations to make it in professional racing.
Well, one question to step back. Two things. What you just brought up opens up a whole other thing. But that the oval track versus road racing, you were obviously it was a bunch of testing and Cup and IRL has data during the races, but back then. But when you're doing data work and you're looking at data traces, is it virtually the same for you? Do you attack oval racing with virtually the same way, the same skill set, or is there some weirdness, some things you do a little bit different in oval track versus road racing?
I don't think there's a lot there. I mean, it's still 4 tires and vehicle dynamics and aerodynamics. You just don't turn 2 directions, and all the corners on the track are pretty much the same speed. But otherwise, it's really quite similar. And in contrast, I did a tiny little bit of pro stock drag racing, which is absolutely 100% different.
Okay, interesting.
Interesting. But no, oval track. I think the interesting thing about oval track racing is that it's everything is sharpened to a finer point.
That 1 mile per hour is more important on that corner exit, right? Yeah.
Oh, absolutely.
Yeah.
Just as a simple example, testing at Daytona with the Cup car, we were running a pitot tube for all our aero sensors, and among other things, I was calculating on a math channel. I was calculating the headwind that we were against, and we found that we had a 3-second gust of headwind of about 5 miles an hour on the back straight of Daytona, and that knocked 500ths off the lap time, and 500ths was roughly where we thought a significant change was. So we, in effect, could blunt a change by having a headwind 3 seconds.
Interesting. That takes some engineering to figure out where that happened, why it happened, and and then try to work around it, right?
Yeah.
So, I did a little bit of ARCA and NASCAR truck work at Daytona during some testing, and totally new to me, right? And when the truck was getting on the back straightaway at certain times during the day, the wind changes there. It was kind of odd to me, but there was times when we would go down the back straightaway and the car was losing speed coming off of turn 2, and about 2/3 or 3/4 of the way down the straightaway, all of a sudden the speed would come back, and and it took me a session. What in the world is going on? And the size of the banking alone was blocking the headwind as the car would get closer to turn 3, and it was just like, wow, this air thing is, there's a lot to this, isn't there? Interesting.
Indeed.
Yeah. Then you said the last 3 years you've been doing some things a little bit different, on the tech compliance side, or looking at balance of performance, or whatever we want to call it, right? How has that been a shift in the way that you study data, or you even approach your job?
Well, it's a fundamental shift in that as a tech director, I have no interest in how an individual team has their car set up. And I'm not terribly interested in how the driver is driving it, except to the extent that he influences the speed it's able to achieve.
Yeah.
So what we're doing is we're picking apart the data in search of some indication that something's been messed with. Just as a simple, for instance, we're looking at injector pulse width, and we found that a team had decided that they were going to run a different injector, which is pretty easily concealed. And unfortunately for them, I guess they underestimated us. And, you put in a different injector and you've got an ECU driving a car toward a lambda target, it changes the pulse width. And so you find it right there in the data, and you go over and you yank the intake manifold, and lo and behold, look what you find.
Another one down in the bottom, huh?
Yeah.
Oops. Oops. The as a data guy, I shared with you a story a couple of days ago that I also went into the tech compliance side a little bit. I've dipped my toe into that, and as a racer, it was hard for me, because it was all of a sudden, maybe you find something and it's you're a racer, so you're born to compete, and then all of a sudden you have to tell somebody that they didn't win when they thought they did. It was a hard thing for me, and I'm sure it is for most folks that step over into that. So before we get into the book, what are 2021? You're going to continue to do the technical director task for at least another year?
Yep, everything keeps working like it is. We'll be carrying on with that, and then it's not 100% full time. So on the side, I'll keep helping some folks here and there with race cars.
There you go, and we'll have some contact information for Buddy as we go along, if anybody has any consulting or needs that they have. When you are working in the series and doing that, do you travel to every race, and then the time that you have off is non-race weekends? Is that how you kind of look at it?
Yeah, except that again, not to bore everybody with what a tech director's life is. We, apart from enforcing the rules on race weekends, we have partners, Ligier, Honda, and Hankook, who participate in making these spec series work. And there's an awful lot of work to be done coordinating things with them.
Pre and post.
So away from the racetrack, there's a bunch of work. And then now at this time of year, it's okay. What do we need to do to fix the rules up for next year? Make everybody's life a little easier. Decrease cost of competing in the series. Make the playing field more level. We have some high objectives, if you will, rather than just okay, who can we catch and smash their finger with a hammer for messing around?
That's not really the biggest target, is it? It's
Not
that's
at
a
all.
piece of it, but that's not the biggest thing.
The whole point of both series is to provide a low cost opportunity for kids to shine as drivers.
Perfect. You talked about you did have a driving background. You'd done some driving, and did you consider yourself fairly good at it? And what did you stay amateur for the most part, or what was the driving background with a little bit more detail?
100% amateur, and just like every other driver, I was the best guy out there.
Oh, there's some truth to that, right? The you were an engineer and a driver. What and when you got out of that, you're not just a data guy, right? You before the technical director side. How did you see your job previous to that? Yeah, you're a you're a data guy. You worked with teams. You probably were downloading the data, but you were also the team engineer. How did you see that hierarchy work out?
In the beginning, it was for me kind of twofold. It was learning professional racing and how it works in all aspects.
Mhm.
And it was also let's say a more immediate and pressing hands-on introduction into vehicle dynamics.
Yeah.
And the end objective always was to be a race engineer. And so, what I was trying to do as I was helping the team move forward and any way I could to contribute to winning was also to build my skill set so that at some point I could put my hand on the lever and start controlling the setup and the springs and shocks and the ratios in the box and what kind of diff we're going to run and go do 7-post testing and wind tunnel testing and all those cool things that you get to do once you get to be a race engineer.
And the final piece of that, I suppose, is race strategy, right? Is that a piece that you would like as well?
Oh, indeed. That was an unexpected thing for me. I went in to be a car guy, and most of my career turned out to be in endurance sports car racing.
Yeah.
And in that world, the race engineer is not dissimilar to what a NASCAR crew chief does. On race day, you're the guy who works out the fuel and tire strategy when we're going to do the driver changes, anticipating why or why not there might be yellows, when are you going to do pit stops. And I, for me personally, that was tremendously rewarding because it was as close as you could get to actually driving to, having a material influence on the outcome of the race. And, there were a couple of races that we won on fuel strategy calls, which people tend to look down on, but I'm telling you, they're the best because, there's a case where you got a good driver and a good car, and if you hadn't made the right call, you wouldn't win. So you feel like you're a big piece of the team, just like the mechanics who prepped a good car and the driver who drove it.
Absolutely. Endurance racing is a love of mine. I think it's my favorite part of what we do. And so I'm just tickled to hear you say that. And those gas mileage races, they don't happen in the last 10 laps, right? I mean, this is something you've been thinking at, studying, using the data and getting ready to make that, pull that trigger on that decision, way early. I mean, this is not, it's not like you happened into this little problem, right? Into this solution. So.
Oh, absolutely. You see it developing over time. And
Exactly.
The first one we won like that, we made a pit stop and we're tooling around in sixth place about half a lap down. And the team owner's going, "What did you do?" I said, "I just won the race for us. Just wait."
You don't know it yet, but we just won this race.
Yep, and we did.
That's funny. That's the person that's got the bigger picture of getting all this data coming in, understanding what the driver is, understanding what all the rest of the teams are doing. You're able to see that coming, and that's just such a skill that a lot of people can't quite do. So I do appreciate that a lot. So as we kind of start to rotate towards the book a little bit, let me jump up a slide here. Pardon me. This is how a lot of the people here know of you, at least at first. Marcos has a question that I see in the question and answer box. I think he's talking to you. I think you saw data acquisition being born. How was it in the beginning? Which sensors you had to logging rates? Early on electronics, as this was starting to build up, what were some of the fights? What did you see? What did you have to do? You were working with GM, I suppose, and so there was a bit of a good budget, but you still had to certain fights.
Well, for one thing, it was terribly expensive. Um, I had a 6-channel system with RPM, wheel speed, throttle position, steering angle, longitudinal and lateral G's. It cost me $6,000. And I had a $7,000 computer to look at DOS software, which basically would just display. It would fortunately overlay graphs. It wasn't stuck with a single channel at a time, but it didn't have banded graphs, so you couldn't do lanes or bands or whatever term you want to use for
Yeah,
it.
yeah.
And it would support a grand total of 12 math channels. So you could use one math channel for a while and then delete it and type in another.
There weren't no stacking up hundreds of math channels like we have some of the folks that are doing
Nope,
now, right?
nope.
There's one point in the book, since you talk about the computers, then, and I grabbed it really quick so I could make sure that I got it right. It talks about computers and technical specs that you probably ought to be looking for, and this is the risk of writing a technical book about computers in 1993, right? The one that I always sticks with me: plan on having at least 10 to 20 megabytes free for data files.
There you go.
And some other lines there that are pretty good as well. But amazing how things have changed, right? So, but it sounds like you had the initial sensors that we're still playing with and looking towards today. So that's pretty interesting. The book, you start. Let's back up. You're in your process. How did this book? You're doing your data engineering work. You're working on in the industry. How did the idea to build a book come up?
I had some consulting companies, a guy and his son who were both degreed engineers, and they were racing as a hobby. And after I went to a couple of events with them, they bought a system of their own, but I was still kind of walking them through using it. And they said, not to take anything away from what you know, but we think we can do this too. If you could just kind of help us out a little bit. I said, well, okay, I'll do you some cheat sheets. And I thought at that point I would probably be doing, capturing maybe 20 or 30 common conditions and writing a one-liner description of it. And the 20 or 30 turned out to be about 180, and the one-liners turned out to be a page. So when it was all done, I said, oh, I've got a book. And that was the great deception. That was about 4 months into an 18-month process.
18 months it took you to write the book, huh?
Well, not to write it. I wrote it in probably 4 months, but
okay.
Getting
Preparing.
it formatted, getting it published. At that point in time, self-publishing wasn't really an option, and PageMaker wasn't a toy for amateurs. And of course, PageMaker's gone now, but that's what my publisher used. So I was fortunate to get hooked up with Bob Towery, who is local to me and was in the publishing business and was an amateur racer. And we were chatting one day, and he found out I was doing this, and he was keen to take it on. So here you go.
Yeah, interesting, and off and running in it. So it comes out in 1993, right? I think is what it
Correct.
says. It said the you wrote it because of some questions that are coming up, to you from users that you're answering all the time. Kind of funny, but a couple of other authors we've talked to, that they ended up writing their books. I think it was Bob Knox that had written some notes to himself about some different things, and he was kind of leaning, maybe an idea of a book, but he carried it around for three years, adding to those, and those notes ended up becoming a book. And it's somewhat similar here with you. This was your first book? Is it your only book?
First and only.
First and only, first and only. Did you have any sort of a writing background before? This certainly is technical writing, so it's not what some might think is that writing background, but had you done anything before?
Not at all. It taught me to write.
Ah,
It was it was a challenge to figure out how to express yourself. And then as I started working with the person at Towery who was primarily responsible for putting it together for me, we both realized that best efforts to the contrary, she wasn't going to be able to help me edit it. So I had to learn how to edit at the same time.
a little technical
Um,
for your normal editor, right?
yeah, it was not, it was not their genre.
Yeah,
And
yeah.
so, it was a good experience, and it taught me a lot about how to express yourself in writing. I still fumble over things verbally, but I can craft a good email.
Yeah, don't we all fumble over things the way that we talk sometimes? No doubt about that. The um, I got this question a couple of times as we were getting ready to go, and I've heard it over the years. What about it went out in '93? It was edition number 1. It's never been reprinted, and it's never had a second edition. Is that something that you have ever considered?
At one point, I was thinking about getting it republished in print, and in the ensuing time, Bob's print, Bob's publishing business has morphed on and gone away. So the people that I was talking to about doing it wanted to do a legit second edition, and at that point, literally, we were 10 years too far down the road to reuse the source materials, and it was going to be a real challenge to put together a legit second edition. So the it, if things go well, I may be able to get it out as an ebook. I now have the copyright for it.
Oh,
Um, and then the other thing that I started on, and then real work intervened, was the blog in 2009, which was going to be kind of an attempt, a sideways attempt at constructing a second book that was going to be entitled The Race Engineer. And it was about what do you do when you're a race engineer. And again, it wasn't going to be a vehicle dynamics text or a how to tune your race car. It was just going to be, all right, these are this is a methodology you have to use to be a race engineer. So pieces of that are on the blog, and I think it's still up. But I haven't, again, work intervened, and the blog sort of fell into rusty disuse as well.
I did read some of that as we were kind of preparing, and there's some pretty good information out there that if you just go search for Buddy's name, it'll pop up. The a slide here that I thought was kind of cool. I just took some pictures of the book that I have here. One of them was the introduction. We won't go through the entire introduction there, but that second, this is actually 2 pages. It's this page here, and then this is on the back side of the same page, so it's part of the same introduction. But what's interesting is this little pull quote that I've got here that really does explain data to me when I try to explain it to folks that aren't in the motorsports world. Data systems don't change one racing fundamental. You still have to dig deep to figure out how to win. And there's a couple of quotes that are like that in the book that are, yeah, this is data. It's a tool. It's a great tool. It's a tool that you must have, but it's, pardon me, but it's not something where you just you buy it, you plug it in, and you're half a second faster, and you move up to the top 3, up on the podium. Doesn't work that way. And so I really appreciate that you keep things fairly straight that way. So I enjoy that. Data power isn't a cookbook. It is a line there that basically you just talked about. So interesting stuff. The for those of you that don't have the book, and if a funny story is I bought this copy probably in 1993, 1994, and it's kind of coming apart. I use it all the time. I still use it a lot. I flip through the pages. The cover's starting to come apart on it, but so I use it a lot. So the other day, a good friend of ours that's in the chat box right now, Matt Romanowski, been a co-host here 6 or 7 times for these webinars, sends me a quick note, and says, "Hey, there's a Buddy Fay book out there that's on the used market. If I don't know if you still have one or have one, but if you don't, there might be a good deal there." So I ended up going online and grabbed a second copy that's not all broken down of what I have. And and the funny part is as I got it and I just started flipping through it, and partway through it, and I left it even on the same page, but partway through it was the original shipping owner to the original owner of the book, purchased in 10/13/93. I'm not sure exactly when the book came out, but that had to be fairly early in it, and sent to downtown New York City, to an office building where this person obviously worked. So I was able to purchase a second book, and if some of you are interested, there are used copies that pop up out there occasionally. Look at the way that the for those of us watching, the way that the table of contents was built was, to me, it's just a nice stepping stone of walking through engineering a car. Decisions before using, understanding it at the track, looking at the data, the car, the driver, the track, right? The big influences. And then what I reread this morning, case study, putting it all together. I wanted to have a pretty good understanding. I think that is just a wonderful way of doing it. You talked about how these things are deeply influencing all the different things, and in order to bring it together, you can't just look at that trace, kind of as you mentioned with the headwind at Daytona earlier. The world is throwing things at you all the time, so I really like the case study chapter. And then tips, caveats, and hints. Everybody, just an idea of what's in the book, so I thought I would share that as well. The BZM 31 ask a question there. This is something totally I am not aware of, but Buddy, are you aware of Carl Kemp's work at Tyrrell in 1977, a Formula One open wheel car built? I'm not sure if he was an engineer or somebody. So does that ring a bell to you, Carl
No, it
Kempf?
doesn't. That
Okay.
predates me.
Yeah, predate. Yeah, you and me both, right? Perfect. The David Darkin says in the chat box, I as well have a second book that is the preserved copy, not for daily use. So a lot of people are taking a look at it all the time. So that's pretty good. And as we kind of get into some other questions, this one here is I don't remember exactly where it is in the book, but I'd like everybody's feedback a little bit on this, and certainly yours. 4 basic rules. This is part of your book. Use the system every time the car runs on the track. Even the briefest practice, can reveal facts. Always examine the data as soon as possible. Always examine the data again later. This is something that I have followed in my data use. And use your racing knowledge, kind of right back to where we were a minute ago. Data acquisition isn't magic. You still have to understand the car, the driver, and the track. Use your common sense for insight into what the data patterns and values are trying to tell you. I enjoy that. Do you remember writing that in there, or is that just a part of your philosophy that this is just a tool?
Obviously, it's been a while since I wrote it,
Obviously,
but
yeah.
if you were to ask me about it on the street, not having seen what I wrote, I would tell you that from day one, there were 2 things about working with data that they're kind of dissimilar, but they drove what I was doing. The first was that it was a real relief to have concrete data, to actually know something rather than what you believed was happening, and that's still there. And then the second was that whenever you see something in data, then you have to work through in your own mind, what made that happen? Why is that there? What am I looking at? For instance, you're looking at suspension pots and you're looking at roll angles, front and rear, and the front and rear roll angle aren't the same. Well, why is that? What made that happen? Is that good or bad? Should they be the same? Should they have some ratio to each other? Should they look dissimilar as the car goes through the corner? And you start asking yourself all these kind of questions, and the answers don't always come quickly and easily, but eventually they do, and there's some revelation in there, and it could just as easily be about driving as it is about the car. But the thing that the number 4 there reflects it. Again, if I was just standing here talking
Yeah.
about it without even looking at that as a prompt, is that we all know a lot. And what we need to do when we're working with our data system is respect our own knowledge and say, okay, here's something in here, and I don't necessarily know what it's telling me right now, but I'm going to find it.
I see it, but we always have these little catchphrases here in a lot of our seminars and our training is, to walk down the path, right? What happened? Where did it happen? Or why did it happen? And your number 4 there is use your racing knowledge to complete that, that path, right? Very, very, very important. And the other side is that data analysis triangle that we always talk about here is you're trying to solve driver performance, or vehicle health, and using your race knowledge is a big piece of making all of that happen. So I do appreciate that. The what do you became a race engineer and had all this these tasks that had to be done at a professional level, working for high value teams, obviously. What are some of the things that you learned that are just as important in an amateur or a racing style, or the guy that's doing his own data work? What is super important? Is it configuration? Is it preparation? Is it what is really important that you can pull from the pro field down into the amateur side?
If you stay with road racing and get away from oval track racing, because oval track is a special, it's a very aero dominated special area. In road racing, in the end, balance, grip, and traction are key. And that doesn't change much between the lowest cost and lowest powered classes and the top pro level. And so you're always looking for, what, and balance is not a, a single monolithic thing. I mean, you need a certain balance on corner entry. You need a certain balance on corner exit. You need a certain balance on mid corner. And, how can I assess that? How can I, and then once I'm able to assess it, is what I have what I want? And if it's not, then where do I go to fix it? And then you use your racing knowledge and say, I was on the phone with a guy the other day, and we were talking about a car that it had a little bit of corner exit understeer, and we were oversteer. And we were digesting, was this a traction problem or was this a rear grip problem? And then once we'd established the answer to that question, then we went into the whole universe of how are we going to solve it? Lower the rear ride height. We're going to change the rear shock adjustment. If we do that, we're going to do rebounded bump. We're going to change rear spring. We're going to change rear bar. We're going to do something with rear suspension geometry. And, there's a big universe of solutions. And that's where you use your racing knowledge and you look at the data and you say, well, okay, what I'm seeing here and what I know about this car and what I know about the way that the person that's driving it drives, I think I'm going to maybe try this. And you try something, and back to that rule number 1 there in the basic rules, you try it, the driver comes in, he says, this changed this. You take a quick peek at the data, you say, yep, I see the difference. We did a good thing or we didn't do a good thing. Keep going.
So that process of strategic thinking, it sounds like to me, is one of the things that that can pull you have used at the pro level and at different levels. You got a question, you walk through the data, it gives you some answers, and then you have to use your racing knowledge to interpret those. So yeah, interesting. Did I
Yeah,
state?
that's absolutely the same at from club level to multi-million-dollar budget. It's still the same thing. It's just how much time and money you got to spend on it and how much resources you got to throw at it. You go pro racing and you got a DAG and you got a shock engineer and you got a race engineer and like Indy cars, for instance.
Yeah.
and you got somebody else who's a race strategist. You go club racing, it's just you, your wrenches, your car, your laptop, but in the end, you're solving the same problem.
How does when you talk about either high end road racing, faster classes with aero, or certainly the oval track stuff, did the aero side of data acquisition analysis, and then then putting it into play, the aero thing, did you get a good handle on that? Do you that to me is a whole nother level of complexity.
Aero is Aero's a lot of work constructing math channels, and I'm umming here because I don't really know where to point you for a reference on that.
Yeah.
If you have either strain gauge push rods, or if you have suspension travel pods, in either case, with some effort, you can have a pretty good idea what your wheel loads are. And you once you know your wheel loads, you can, and if you know, and if you're fortunate enough to know your suspension geometry, then you can calculate what portion of the wheel load is due to aerodynamics,
Okay.
and what portion is due to inertial changes. Like uh, you see front wheel loads under braking. Well, some of that wheel load under braking is because you've transferred weight to the front, but some of it is because the car pitched forward and now it's at a greater rate, and the aero balance has moved to the front. And with some effort, some considerable effort, you can get an actual downforce number and a downforce balance.
Interesting.
And
That I'm sorry, go ahead.
and it's it's a not impossible order, but it takes a certain amount of, I mean, apart from the knowledge that it takes to write the math channels, it takes a certain amount of diligence to keep it going. If you're running strain gauge push rods, you got to keep them in calibration. You've always got to have good zeros. Your math channels, if you're working through your suspension travels, your math channels have to know what spring rates are in the car, and you need a structure that allows you to do that without embedding those in the math channel itself, so that when you change spring rates, you don't have to change the math channel.
Yeah, create even more work, right?
Thus creating more work. So um, that said, it's a powerful tool.
What I enjoyed about that discussion right there is you took the exact same path, the engineering mindset, I suppose. It is just another issue. Yes, there's a few more hurdles to climb and jump, and hills to climb, but there is a process, and you create the process, and you resolve the issue, right?
And carrying that, and this isn't an aero question, but carrying that a step further, on a push rod car, you don't have this luxury on a coilover spring track car like a GP car. But on a push rod car, all the wheel loads go through the push rod. So your spring loads and your anti-roll bar loads go through it.
Okay.
And it's really pretty straightforward once you've got that all going to work out weight transfer and to get a weight transfer balance. And I know we had one particular car and one particular driver who had a really narrow window of what he would tolerate for setup. And we could literally say, okay, our front weight transfer balance on this setup is 61% and you like it. And on this other one is 63% and you think it pushes. And on this other one is 59.5% and you think it's too loose. That, again, takes a mountain of math channels and an understanding of vehicle dynamics. But once you get there, it's a real blessing, because then kaboom, the guy comes in, he says it's pushing. You look at the data, you go, okay, we're going to soften the front bar quick.
Yeah. You've done the pre-work, right? You've done a lot of work to get to that point where you can make that decision in a hurry. Yep. One of the things that Jorge, who is here watching today, that he mentioned a lot, there is a ton of pre-work, pre-setup to make it where you can make things happen in a hurry at the track. So
That's absolutely true. Setting up your math channels, setting up your graph combinations, working out what kind of smoothing you want to use, all those things get you your tools so that then when you got to go through it, you just go, yep, there's that. Yep,
there it
there's
is.
that.
There it is.
And then the backside of that is post event. My rule of thumb always had been that if I had the luxury of time to do it, it took as long to analyze the data as it did to run the event. And that sounds like a lot of time, and it is a lot of time for somebody that's in the club racing level. But if you engage that amount of time, or even approach it over time, things will become more routine and will become muscle memory for you, and they'll come to you more quickly. The mystery goes away.
And when you're at the pro level where you created some of this muscle memory, the difference between the front team and the 10th place team is 2 or 3%, right? So that work, that additional engineering and that data work, getting where when you get to the next track or the next time you come back to that track,
Absolutely.
you start fast is the difference of what you started at on Friday is a huge difference on where you end up on Sunday. So the one of the questions that I saw come in is there anything you could look at in the data that steers you to a car correction or a driver correction? It's the old, the classic, is it the driver or is it the car, right? How would you attack something like that? Do you have to break it down and see where the inputs and where the things that are happening and which is creating the speed or the lack of speed?
That's a two-edged sword. The driver and the team and the car work together as a system, and they influence each other. That said, how do you say this? Over time, it gets relatively clear, certain obvious things are cause and effect. For instance, you can learn in data to recognize somebody who arcs into the corner a little early, and if you have video on the car, you're 100 miles ahead on that. So once you know that, then it's really easy to understand why you have mid to exit understeer and why you're late getting to the throttle, because you bent the car into the corner too early, and in the second half of the corner when you should be releasing it and going to the throttle, instead you're trying to get it to finish the corner. And I'm just using that as an example, and there's 100 situations like that. But again, putting yourself putting your mind's eye in the car and your ass in the driver's seat, you go, oh, okay, I think this is what I'm seeing here. And
you mentioned,
and then you try a solution, and if the solution doesn't work, then there's one or two things happen. Is either you diagnosed it wrong, or you didn't do the right solution. So that's life in the big time. If you Mark Donahue said in his book, if half of his stuff worked, he called it a rousing success. And I'm going to tell you, if he could get half of it to work, he was ace.
Yeah. He was pretty darn good, obviously, and if he only was hitting at 50%, that's saying something how hard this actually is, right?
Yep.
The and to reinforce what you've already said, and the book says a bunch of times as well, the driver is interacting with what the car is doing, and the car is interacting with how the driver is doing it, and it's never just a clear cut, put your pen on the paper and there's your problem, right? There's this dance that's happening that keeps that does not make that easy to see sometimes. So on the driver versus the car thing, you mentioned video. When you first started this, there probably video maybe wasn't as as available as it is today. If you're out there doing data work, is data a big piece of what you would do today? Do you go look at the data first and then the video to back up something you see, or do you work at the video first and see something and then go into the data to find it, or is it the team and the driver you're working with that drives you?
I think for me, video is for the things that I get. This is probably not a fair thing to say. If I had come up with video, I would use video more. I've developed a skill set where I see things in strip charts, and so or in XY graphs or histograms or whatever,
Mhm.
and they're just there and they're patently obvious. But that said, there are some things that there's no substitute for seeing the video. I mean, it's 10 times easier to know where the driver places the car on the track with video than it is with data. For instance, um, if if the driver says, "Yeah, I'm getting top-ended," there's nothing like watching it happen on the video.
Yeah.
So it's a combination of the two.
I agree with you. The squiggly lines or the strip charts or the measures graphs, all the same thing, different ways of saying it. I have gotten to the point where you can look at something and then immediately you can see, certain things you just the muscle memory again tells you if your lateral G looks like this, that's probably this is happening, right? Or if the driver gets after the throttle and comes back and then goes again, that immediately catches your eye and you start to look and understand why. Many folks that grew up with video are now seeing something in the video, they go look at the data, but and so I think it's really a learning thing. One of the very early ones that I ran into is my son was racing a Spec Miata, and he was 16 years old, right? And he didn't know any better. Finally, we had a camera in the car, and we were looking at it in between sessions. And as he was turning into literally every corner, this happened to be at Thunder Hill in Northern California. He would turn in, and he would have to catch this low horsepower Spec Miata in a group. He would have to catch the car every time. Is entry oversteer almost every time. I'd had the data all weekend long, and I did not see it. Right, the strip charts did not point that out to me. And as soon I asked, well, how long has it been doing that? And he go, what? That's the way that car always does, right? And I said, no, I think we can fix that, and pop, 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 and we make a few changes, and he went from, fifth or sixth right to running up at the front end of the pack at that point, and it just shows that there are many different ways of gathering data. Use your tools, right?
Exactly.
Interesting. And another question as we're kind of starting to wrap this up a little bit, something we ask most people, and I know this is one of those that it depends as a big answer, but and you started off with this question. I just wanted to throw a little bit, maybe a little bit more meat on those bones. What basic sensors are important to you? You mentioned that your very first system had a lot of what you needed: speed, RPM, the driver inputs, throttle, brake, steering, and lateral and longitudinal G. Are those the core? And is that 90% of what you would need if you went working today? Or is there been a change in your thought on what sensors are important?
Um, those do an awful lot of the legwork for you. There are, uh, let's say we were pro racing today. Um, I would have 3 axis accelerometer instead of two. I think a GPS is indispensable.
Nowadays, yeah.
Um, there's an awful lot to be learned out of a yaw meter
Oh,
and front and rear brake pressures and your four suspension travel pods. If I had all those, if it wasn't a pushrod car, if it's a pushrod car, I'd like to have strain gauges. But if I had all those, I could do an awful lot of work.
you are almost all the way there with that, even without some of the aero tools. Huh? You're
Yeah,
you're you're almost there anyway. You
yeah.
have everything you need. Interesting. And for our guys that are watching this that have some good basic AIM data systems, they have the ability to do basically what you said. Mine, maybe a lot of them wouldn't do the strain gauges, but they're pretty close to everything you just talked about. So perfect, perfect. Andy had a question there as we kind of start to button it up. When testing, What do you think about cameras outside the car, looking at the tires or other things? You have that ability now with some of these sport cameras where we can look at what sidewalls are doing, or maybe what the way things are tucking and moving. Maybe it's down to the driver's feet. What do you think about if you had the opportunity to have some things like that? Is that something you would like to have?
Two things. One, it's great stuff. And two, in the right circumstances, it's absolutely guaranteed to scare the shit
Like a great Southern gentleman, you get right to the point, right? Just
out of them.
we did put some
No,
tires.
in all seriousness, it's fabulous because there are things
It
you
is
just can't
amazing.
learn from data, either
Yeah.
because it's difficult to sense or whatever. Um,
And there is noise in these sensors too, and these sensors can be so complex, and sometimes you can overwhelm yourself too. I agree with you.
cameras are a blast. Great tool.
I remember one time we were at Homestead in a Mustang, and we were hurting the tires. There was some people that were hurting the tire, including my son, uh, and so that we put a camera on the outside looking down, and I was shocked. I had no idea what a tire was going through, especially early when it was cold and maybe a little lower pressure than what they might suggest you might want to have. And to watch what that tire did and how close that wheel was coming to the curbs as the tire was rolling around, that camera was valuable for us to. We didn't change the setup a ton, but we would go and say, okay, stay off the curbs for a couple of laps till these tires get up to get some pressure built into them, right? So interesting. And Charles had a question there that I'll tidy this up. The Thunderhill story with the Spec Miata. It was a rear toe issue. I had cycled everything, and I thought I had it where I kind of wanted, knowing when it was moving in its travel, what I wanted it to do. But as it was loading the rear tire, the tire was maybe towing out a little bit right at that early part of when I need transition in, and as um, a race engineer that I was chatting with, that I spent a little bit of time with, says to me, and it was gosh, I'm trying to. I think it was John Block. He gave a talk where I was at, and he says the car goes wherever the tires are pointed. That was the kind of the headline of his starting point. And then when he gave the title of what he was going to talk about, boy, that Miata did exactly that. And so as soon as we towed in the rear, gave up a little bit of top end speed. Not that they had a ton anyway, but gave up a little bit, but it made the car drive so much better in the 80% of the track where you're actually turning. So that was the closing of that. The um, Perfect. I appreciate it, buddy. Is there anything else you'd like to kind of add before we start to kind of close it down? I love that we talked about the book, but it was as much about data and engineering and strategies and some other things around the books. I really enjoyed the conversation. Anything else you'd like to add?
Oh, I'm good as long as we've answered everybody's questions.
Yeah, we've done okay. There is one there that I haven't actually even read all the way through it. Is there criteria when historical data becomes obsolete? And if not, what's a good way to archive data and analysis? Talking about you've got some old data related. How can you use the data obtained from other teams, even other championships, during a current session? It's the question being, of course, is I've got previous data, new, old, other cars. Yeah. What is your topic? What is your idea on looking at comparing data, whether it be even old data sometimes?
Ultimately, it needs to be relevant. If you're running the same series or the same car over and over, year in and year out, you know, two very specialized forms of racing are IndyCar racing and NASCAR, and they take the same car to the same track on the same tire year in and year out. In places like that, archival is a big deal. In other places, you could literally almost throw it away and start over and use your basic knowledge. It's going to depend on what you're doing.
I really enjoy that answer, because it's in the book, and in several times it's data's coming into you, it's your job to understand what value to give to that data. And if it's old data that has no relevance, it could just as easily screw you up as help you. And just like sensor data coming in, you look at the four-wheel speeds and the GPS, and if there's a problem with the GPS, you transition away from trusting that for that particular session. And it may be your driven tire versus your unloaded tire. You look at that speed sensor, you give it value, right? And I think that's just a huge part of a data guy's toolbox. So, perfect. And then one last thing I would add is something I saw in the book, and it was you were the first one that brought this into my mind, and you did it with lots of graphics in the book, which yeah, we're looking at forces, but we also have to think about the slope of the roadway, and if it's an off-camber corner, mid-Ohio, kind of a couple corners at mid-Ohio, or is there a lot of banking, camber to that corner, you actually threw in some graphs, and you talk about making sure you understand that every corner, just because it's looking down on it from a GPS sensor, let's say, yeah, it has the same radius and all that, but the corner feels totally different than what you would do with the car. And those graphs brought that to my mind, because I wasn't a road racer before I got into working in the data world. So something like that was real helpful to me, and I really appreciated that piece.
Yeah, it's a temptation for road racers to always think in terms of lateral and longitudinal load transfer, but it's a real eye opener the first time you put your hands on an accelerometer or vertical G's and begin to grasp the significance of vertical load, and vertical load's a big deal.
Yeah, at first you see it, you look at it, and you think, okay, I got this, I got the world, here, I know exactly what's going on, and the more you use it, the more you figure out that that sensor can lie to you sometimes because there's so many other effects to it, so. Thanks again. I think we've covered most of them. I will, as I'm closing out, I'll ask Jay's question. Where do you get the best barbecue in Memphis, right? So I'll leave that one here. I'll give you a second to think about that one. This webinar, just like all the rest of them, currently up to about 131 videos, will be placed on our YouTube site. As soon as we get done, within a couple of hours, we'll have it up there. Pass it around to all your friends. Let them know that that we're out here and we're recording these things and having them out there for folks to take a look at. So it'll be up there very shortly. AIM is a customer support company that happens to sell racing electronics, is the term that we always use here. Give us a call. For those of you that are out there and have a little bit of any questions you might want to do, let me know. We will take care of that. Joe asked, will the presentation be posted too? Yes, I will. I will turn that into a PDF and put it in a zip file, and it'll be in the description of the YouTube box. I didn't send it out this time. It's number one, I was kind of working on it right up to the last minute, but so I will put that out there. Our next webinar is boy, this is a crazy week for me. These are a couple guys that I've always looked up to. First with Buddy, and then on Thursday we're going to have Jeff Brown come in here and give us a talk about race engineering as well. And the loose tie that I am using a little bit to tie it all together is he also is a co-author on a book called Inside Racing Technology. So we'll have Jeff chatting with us. I think he's trying to recover from a Sebring endurance race over the weekend. Don't know how he did, but so we'll have him on here on Thursday. Looking forward to that more than you might know. Met Jeff. Met him a few times before at PRI show and some other stuff, but worked a little bit with him when he was in a global rallycross program. So that's why I use that picture there. So it'll be a great time chatting with him too. The oops, there we go. The just kind of a closing. Do you have an answer to the Memphis barbecue question that that was asked? You have so many, probably, right? So.
Oh, I'll tell you, fights have been had over that, and long debates. The main answer is the best Memphis barbecue is in Memphis.
There's the bigger argument, the bigger picture part of that, right? There you go. I appreciate that. There's Buddy's contact information. If you have a question you'd like to chat with Buddy, see if you can use his services, get some information from him. Betty Fay at yahoo.com is the best way to get a hold of him. And go out there and continue to look for the used versions of his books. It sounds like to me that he is not 100% against maybe working on something in the future as far as the publishing side of another edition down the road, maybe. So I overstate that a little bit, but I'll throw that out there just to get Buddy not feeling well as he leaves. So, but thanks, Buddy. Anything else you'd like to add on our way as we kind of close this out?
I believe we're good. I sure appreciate everybody tuning in.
I appreciate you coming. It's been a thrill for me. I know there's the notes I've been getting that want folks that wanted to listen to you chat and ask you a few questions has been high, and I'm very, very thankful that you came and did this. And maybe it's something we can do down the road again if we think of there's a few other questions we might want to chat about. So I appreciate you coming. Thank you everybody for coming, and looking forward to seeing everybody on Thursday. It's going to be a great time with Jeff as well. Thanks everybody. Talk to you soon.